Great. I'm going to call the City of Port Colborne public meeting to order, and the adoption of the agenda. If I can have Councillor Wells, Councillor Clayliff move the agenda. Are there any questions on the agenda? Seeing none, anybody opposed? That's carried. Any disclosures of interest, Council? Seeing none, we do have one. Is Councillor Beauregard has a conflict of interest as he works for one of the consultants on this application, so he's not here this evening. So this is a public meeting under the Planning Act. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Schultz to go through it. David, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, members of council, staff, and members of the public that are tuning in to watch tonight. This purpose of this meeting is pursuant to Section 34 of the Planning Act and to consider an application submitted by the agent, Matt Kernahan of Upper Canada Consultants, on behalf of the owner, Coolwant Sodi, for the lands legally known as part of Lot 31, Concession 3, formerly in the Township of Humberstone, now in the City of Port Colborne, Regional Municipality of Niagara, municipally known as 607 Barrack Road. The application for zoning bylaw amendment proposes to change the zoning of Parcel 1 from residential development, which is RD, to the first density residential zone, R1. A holding provision is being sought for Parcel 2 in order to restrict development until a secondary plan is adopted by City Council. Parcel 2 will remain zoned as residential development with an added holding provision. The zoning bylaw amendment is being sought to satisfy a condition of severance under consent application B05-20-PC. Notice of the public meeting was administered in accordance with Section 34 of the Planning Act as amended and Section 5 of Ontario Regulation 545/06. The notice of public meeting was circulated to required agencies and property owners within 120 meters of the property on June 28, 2021. A public notice sign was also posted on the property by June 29, 2021. Finally, notice was also provided on the city's website under current applications. As of the date of this meeting, staff has received comments from the following members of the public: Dominic and Linda Sardella of 531 Barrack Road, Gary Breda of Braemont Homes Corporation, Josephine Sardella of 577 Barrack Road, Lydia Di Lorenzo of 541 Barrack Road. The property owners I just listed all submitted the same letter outlining similar concerns regarding this application. Their concerns are that if the severance is to commence and whoever owns it, lives, or potentially buys the severed lot, that they acknowledge and accept that they will not oppose any secondary plan designs prepared prior to or after the date of this approval, where the Sardella family has shown on any submitted secondary plans. The access road may be shifted to the east or west of the severed lot, and they may not contest or oppose any design submissions. They request this as a condition of approval. Comments were also received from the Niagara region. The region suggested that the city may wish to consider identifying the studies that will be required for the secondary plan as part of the holding provision. At the pre-consultation meeting, the required studies for the secondary plan process included a planning justification report, archaeological assessment, urban design brief, noise study, functional servicing report, stormwater management report, and an environmental impact study. The region concludes that from a provincial and regional perspective, the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement and conforms to the provincial and regional plans. The procedure to be followed this evening will be to present Department of Planning and Development Report 2021-204, hear any comments from the applicant, receive questions of clarification from council to the applicant or planning staff, open the meeting to the public for comments and questions, and announce the requirements under the Planning Act for written notice of passage on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. At this time, I would like to present Planning and Development Report 2021-204. If I could just share my screen quickly. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Thank you, David.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. The property is located on the north side of Barrack Road. The surrounding land uses are primarily made up of residential and greenfield properties. To the northwest of the property exists a significant woodland and provincially significant wetland. That is shown off the map on this picture here, way up in this left corner. City of Port Colborne official plan designates the property as urban residential. Land uses in the urban residential designation include residential, neighborhood commercial, and community facilities and institutional facilities. The purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment is to implement policies of the official plan that require a secondary plan prior to the future development of the lands. The official plan designation is not proposed to be changed as a result of this application. The subject property is currently zoned residential development. The RD zone permits detached dwellings and uses, structures, and buildings accessory thereto. The R1 zoning proposed for the lot will match the properties directly adjacent on Barrack Road. As mentioned prior, the application for zoning bylaw amendment proposes to change the zoning of parcel 1, as shown on this sketch here, from residential development to first density residential, or R1. And the holding provision is being sought for parcel 2 in order to restrict development until a secondary plan is adopted by City Council. Parcel 2 will remain zoned as residential development with an added holding provision. The zoning bylaw amendment is once again being sought to satisfy a condition of consent under B05-20-PC. At this time, Your Worship, I would like to invite the applicant to comment.
Great, thank you, David.
Thank you.
Mr. Kernahan, there he is. Good evening, Mr. Kernahan, how are you?
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council staff. I'm just fine, thank you. How is everyone this evening? Can I be heard okay?
Yep, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks very much. I don't want to take up too much of council's time, but I did prepare a brief presentation that, if I'm allowed to share my screen, I will share with council.
Yep, go ahead.
So, as I mentioned, my name's Matt Kernahan. I'm the planning manager here at Upper Canada Consultants, and I'm the agent representing the property owner. Our office is located at 30 Hanover Drive in St. Catharines. I'd like to begin just by thanking council for providing me the opportunity to speak on this application this evening. As usual, Port Colborne planning staff have done a very thorough job of presenting the planning application to council in their report and in that presentation. So I don't intend to spend too much of your time this evening. I just have a few slides to maybe reiterate some of those points and touch on the high points of the application. So on behalf of our client, Colborne Sodi, UCC submitted an application for a zoning bylaw amendment for the lands located at 607 Barrack Road. This parcel is a large 3+ hectare parcel of land located on the north side of Barrack Road, west of West Side Road. The site currently contains a single detached residential dwelling and some associated accessory structures. The property is designated residential development in the region of Niagara's official plan, and the town of, or is designated for residential development in the region's official plan, as well as the city's, and the site is currently zoned residential development. Around this time last year, Upper Canada, on behalf of the property owner, made an application for consent to sever one residential lot containing the existing single detached dwelling from the larger development parcel to the west and north. The proposed lot would have 25 meters of frontage and an area of 1,178 square meters. The proposal is to continue using this property as a single detached residential dwelling. The retained parcel is 3.23 hectares of land and is proposed for future residential use, subject to council's approval of future development applications. The owner plans to sell this parcel so it can be developed in the future. At the September 9th, 2020 Committee of Adjustment meeting, the committee approved the application to sever the parcel of land containing the single detached dwelling, and the approval is subject to a number of conditions requiring the owner to do a number of things. One of those conditions of approval is the requirement for the owner to obtain approval of a zoning bylaw amendment for the property. The intention of this condition is to ensure that the property is developed in an orderly fashion and that the severance does not frustrate the ability for the land surrounding it to be developed in an efficient manner. The application that has been made and is before you this evening has two distinct parts that each serve their own distinct purpose. Parcel 1, which is shown in yellow, is subject to the first part of the amendment. As David mentioned, the zoning of this parcel will change from residential development to residential 1 zone. This will permit the continued use of this parcel as a single detached dwelling subject to the regulations of the R1 zone. The use of this parcel will not change. This will simply be a paper amendment that will enable the severance. Parcel 2 is shown in pink and is subject to the second part of the amendment. The zoning of this parcel will change from residential development to a site-specific residential development zone with a holding provision added. That holding provision, the purpose of the zoning change is to prevent any construction or development on this parcel until a secondary plan is prepared and adopted by council. This amendment is intended to ensure that a plan for this larger parcel is put in place that ensures that it will be developed efficiently, that it will not have any negative impacts on the environment or the neighborhood, that it can be provided with adequate municipal services, and that it will not negatively impact the ability of neighboring properties to develop. Completion of that secondary plan would involve the owner of the property undertaking a number of detailed studies at his own expense. And these studies might include an environmental impact study, traffic study, functional servicing and stormwater management study, archaeological assessments, and possibly others. The purpose of these studies is to inform the development of a plan and policies to guide the development of the property and possibly others surrounding it. Once the secondary plan process is complete, it would be submitted to council for adoption and later to the region of Niagara for approval. The holding provision on the zoning of the lands cannot be removed until this process is complete. In this way, council is assured that no development can occur on the larger parcel until it is studied carefully and a plan to best use it is approved by council. In closing, I'd like to thank Port Colborne planning staff once again for their work and attention to this file. They've done a wonderful job of summarizing the application, its history, and how it relates to applicable planning policies. The purpose of this amendment before you this evening is simply to enable the severance of one lot containing a single detached dwelling that will continue to be used as it is today. The rezoning will permit the separation of the larger parcel, but will ensure that it is not developed any further until detailed studies have been undertaken and a secondary plan is adopted by council. This process will ensure that the severance does not interfere with the orderly development of the large remnant parcel or surrounding properties. Maintaining the developability of these larger parcels is in the interests of the city, the public, my client as the landowner, and represents good land use planning. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions the council has at this time.
Great, thank you, Mr. Kernahan. I'll just wait till we get everybody here. Okay, I have Councillor Bruno.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Mr. Kernahan. Thank you for the excellent presentation. You mentioned that the parcel with the current home on it would be R1. Is that the same? Maybe this is David, because it's to deal with the other homes. Are they, the homes along there, all in the R1?
David?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruno, that's correct. All the properties that have single detached dwellings on them on Barrack Road are R1.
Thank you. And could you, David, perhaps indicate what R1 means and what can be done on with R1?
David?
Yep, through you, Mr. Mayor. The R1 zone permits the single detached dwelling and accessory uses. So those accessory uses can include garages and sheds on the property. I will say that in all zones that can support a dwelling, an accessory dwelling unit is a permitted use as well. So even if it is a single detached dwelling, an accessory unit is permitted in that under provincial policy. But for the most part, the R1 zone permits a single detached dwelling and garages and accessory uses.
So can an R, if I could, so can an R1 be split into an apartment and the residence or a duplex?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, that would not be a permitted use in that zone.
Okay, well, perhaps this is for, so any concern about the R1 existing is not a matter for this evening. It's a matter for bylaw or planning.
David?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if there were uses that aren't permitted in the R1 zone that were existing on the property, then they wouldn't be permitted. If that is a concern, then that would be bylaw or planning that looks into that.
Councillor?
I've been made aware of it as a concern, but it was only as late as today. But I can't verify that, so I could discuss that with planning. That wouldn't impinge tonight, would it?
No, this wasn't. This application wouldn't relate to that per se.
Very good. Thank you, David. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Claylough?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to David, I guess. The property to the west of that, I know I've looked at this before. We were looking at it, I believe, with committee. That piece of property is not part of this whole parcel, is it? It's a separate piece?
David?
Mr. Mayor, there is a separate parcel to the west of this land that I believe is vacant as it is right now.
And it is not owned by the same person who owns the rest of this parcel?
No, it isn't.
Okay, and my understanding, if I remember correctly, this parcel is needed as an entranceway to get in as access to that piece behind it, right? If I remember what they talked about?
David?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, not necessarily. The entrance that has been left on the subject property, being 607 Barrack, is wide enough for a municipal road in the future, being 66 feet, I believe. So that would be held with the holding provision until that secondary plan is complete to ensure that that roadway comes through.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure. I thought I remembered that. I wanted to make sure that that was how it was. Thank you, David.
Good. Thank you, Councillor. Councillors, any further questions to the applicant or to staff? Okay. Oral presentations under questions from the public. We don't have any delegations this evening. David has already brought forward the names of those that have contacted him with their questions, and I know he's looked after that. So David, take it from here.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do have a few statements to read out, if you don't mind. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Port Colborne before a decision on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is passed by council, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the City of Port Colborne Council to the local planning appeal tribunal. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submission to the City of Port Colborne before a decision on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is passed by council, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before a local planning appeal tribunal, unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to do so. I'm just going to share my screen one more time. To any interested members of the public, if you would like to receive any future notices regarding this application, you can contact myself at david.schultz@portcolborne.ca or by phone at 905-835-2900, extension 202, or you can contact the city clerk at amber.lapointe@portcolborne.ca or extension 106. You mentioned there aren't any members of the public that wish to speak to this application, so I'll read one final statement. If any members wish to be notified of the approval of the zoning bylaw amendment, you must make a written request to the clerk. Only those persons and public bodies that give the clerk a written request for the notice of passing of a zoning bylaw amendment will be given notice. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment and recommendation report will return to council at a later date. Given the timeframes for the consent application, council could expect to see this application back quite soon. This concludes my portion of the public meeting. I will now turn the meeting back to you, Mayor Steele, to close the public portion of the meeting and receive the report for information.
Great. Thank you, David. Good job.
Thank you.
So at this time, if I could have Councillors Bodner and Councillor Bagu move to receive this. Are there any questions, further questions by council? Seeing none, anyone opposed to that? That's carried. So, having no further business, I now adjourn this meeting. Thank you. David, can you stay on for a minute?